One day in the mid-1980s, a young woman named Stephanie Lazarus walks into a hospital in Glendale, California, and asks to see a nurse who works there, a woman named Sherri. The two of them barely know each other, but Stephanie has come to deliver a message, and she does not soften it. She tells Sherri to stay away from a man named John, and then she says the thing that Sherri will repeat to the people she trusts, the sentence that will end up hanging over everything that comes next. If she cannot have John, Stephanie tells her, then nobody else will. A few months later, Sherri Rasmussen is dead, beaten and shot inside her own home. And the police are going to look at that scene and call it a burglary and turn away from the woman who made that threat, because that woman is one of their own. Stephanie Lazarus is a Los Angeles police officer, and it is going to take 23 years and a bite mark frozen in an evidence locker to prove that she meant every single word. There are only 3 people who really matter in this story, and the tragedy of it is that the danger between them was visible long before anyone died. John Ruetten and Stephanie Lazarus knew each other from their days at UCLA. At some point they had been close, involved, the kind of relationship that meant something. But John moved on. He met a woman named Sherri Rasmussen, and he fell in love, and the two of them got engaged. There is one detail here that would only come out much later, and it matters. Even after John met Sherri, even as he was falling for the woman he would marry, he and Stephanie did not completely let go of one another. There was at least one occasion during his relationship with Sherri when John and Stephanie were intimate. To John, it may have been nothing more than the loose end of an old college romance. To Stephanie, by everything that came after, it appears to have been proof of something she believed she could still win back, if only the other woman were out of the way. Sherri was not an ordinary catch, and that may have made it worse. She was sharp, accomplished, and young to have already climbed so high. By her late 20s, she was the director of critical care nursing at a hospital, running a unit responsible for the sickest patients in the building. She was 29 years old, newly married, standing at the very beginning of the life she and John were building together. Stephanie Lazarus, meanwhile, had become a police officer with the LAPD, and she had not let go of John. Not when he started seeing Sherri, not when he proposed, not when he married her. The warnings were there long before anyone died, if anyone had wanted to see them. There was the visit to the hospital where Lazarus tracked Sherri down at work to tell her, in person, to back off the man she had already married. There was the line Sherri carried home from it, that if Stephanie could not have John, no one would. And there was the day, about a month before the murder, when Sherri came home to the condo she shared with John and found she was not alone. Stephanie Lazarus was already inside, waiting for her. Sherri told people what was happening. She told those closest to her about the woman who kept appearing, the ex-girlfriend who happened to carry a badge and a gun. She was, by every sign, a frightened woman who could see something coming. On the 24th of February, 1986, it came. John Ruetten comes home to the townhouse in the Van Nuys area of Los Angeles that evening, and he finds his wife of only a few months. Sherri has been beaten. She has been shot 3 times in the chest. She is gone. And she did not die easily. The scene tells the story of a savage fight. There are signs of a struggle all through the home, the marks of a woman who battled her attacker with everything she had. There is a ligature mark on one of her wrists, where at some point she had been bound, and on her arm, there is a bite. In that fight, Sherri had gotten close enough to sink her teeth into the person who was killing her. That night, an LAPD homicide detective named Lyle Mayer questions a shattered, weeping John Ruetten about the day his wife died. And around them, the other investigators take in the disturbed scene, the moved stereo equipment, the ransacked look of the place, and they reach for a familiar label, a hot prowl. A burglar who broke in, got surprised, and killed the woman who caught him in the act, a stranger, Bad luck in a bad moment. That is the story the LAPD settles on almost immediately. It is the wrong story, but it is a convenient one, because the right story points somewhere the department does not want to look. Sherri's father, Nuys Rasmussen, does not believe the burglary for a second. He knows what his daughter had been living through. He knows about the ex-girlfriend, the confrontations, the fear. And so he goes to the detectives working the case, and he tells them plainly, "Look at the other woman. Look at John's former girlfriend. Look at the one who threatened her." He is telling them, in effect, to look at a Los Angeles police officer, and he is shut down. When Nuys presses, when he argues that the sheer brutality of the killing points to someone with a personal reason to hate his daughter, the detective brushes him aside. He tells Nuys he has been watching too much television. "Do not go there," he says. "There is nothing there." There was everything there. But the family's certainty did not fit the file the department had already decided to write. So the burglary story stood, and the case, with all its obvious threads leading straight to a jealous ex who wore the same uniform as the men investigating it, went cold. For the next 23 years, that is where Sherri Rasmussen's murder sat, unsolved. Officially, a random robbery that had never been cracked. And Stephanie Lazarus went on living. She stayed with the LAPD. She was good at the job. She climbed. She eventually made detective, working in the art theft unit, a respected investigator carrying a badge and a gun of her own. She married. She built a family. She spent more than 2 decades as one of the people the public was supposed to trust to catch killers. And by most accounts, she was good at being that person. Colleagues liked her. People who worked alongside her would later describe her as kind, as a solid and dedicated detective, as close to the last person on earth they would ever have suspected of something like this. That is the quiet horror sitting at the center of this whole case. The woman Sherri had described to her family in fear, the one who said that if she could not have John, then no one would, spent the next 23 years wearing a badge. And almost everyone around her saw only the badge. The whole time, Nuys Rasmussen and his family lived with something almost worse than not knowing. They knew. They had always known. They had handed the answer to the police at the very beginning and been told there was nothing there. And so they waited, with no power to make anyone listen, as the woman they believed had murdered Sherri walked free and successful and protected. Nuys Rasmussen never accepted the burglary. Not for a single year of those 23. He held on to his certainty that the ex-girlfriend had done this, and he held on to the things his daughter had told him before she died. He was an ordinary father, with no authority over a police department that had already closed the book. All he had was the truth, and the sheer stubbornness to outlast everyone who did not want to hear it. And there is a hard question underneath all of it that the LAPD has never fully answered. Was Sherri's case simply botched, a lazy leap to burglary and nothing more? Or did the trail go cold, in part, precisely because following it meant pointing at one of their own, and no one in 1986 had the stomach for that? The honest answer is probably some of both. Either way, the outcome was identical. A killer with a badge, shielded for 23 years by the very institution she served, while the family she had destroyed was told, again and again, that there was nothing there. What none of them knew was that Sherri, in her last moments, had left behind a piece of the truth, and it was still there, waiting, in a freezer. When Sherri fought for her life in 1986, she left a mark on her attacker. During the struggle, she bit the person who was killing her, and the medical examiner back then had the presence of mind to swab that bite mark and preserve the tissue. For over 20 years, that little sample sat frozen in an LAPD evidence locker, holding on to a killer's DNA that the science of the 80s could not yet fully use. Then, in the late 2000s, a new generation of cold case detectives pulled Sherri's file back off the shelf. Going through the old evidence, they saw the one thing the original investigators had preserved but never been able to use, that bite mark swab. They sent it for modern DNA testing, almost as a long shot, on a case that had been dead for 2 decades. And when the result came back, it detonated the entire official story in a single stroke. The DNA was female. There was no male burglar. There never had been. The person who beat and shot Sherri Rasmussen, and who she managed to bite in her final fight, was a woman. And the moment detectives accepted that, one name that had been sitting in the file, ignored for 23 years, rose straight to the top. The ex-girlfriend, the one Sherri had feared, the one her father had begged them to investigate, Stephanie Lazarus. A detective now in their own department, and that changed everything about how the case had to be run. The detectives were no longer just chasing a suspect. They were quietly building a murder case against a sitting LAPD detective, a colleague with decades on the force who knew exactly how investigations worked, who carried a badge and a gun, and who could vanish or be tipped off the instant she sensed the walls closing in. So they told almost no one. They moved in secret, inside their own building, hunting one of their own. What happens next is one of the quietest, strangest takedowns in modern police history. The detectives cannot exactly walk up to a fellow officer and ask her for a DNA sample. So they do it the way you would with any other suspect who does not know they are being watched. They follow her. Surveillance officers tail Stephanie Lazarus, and they wait for her to do something ordinary. Eventually, she does. She buys a drink, finishes it, and throws the cup away in a public trash can. That is the moment. As soon as she walks off, they recover the cup and they send it to the lab, and they compare the DNA on it to the DNA from the bite mark that Sherri left on her killer 23 years earlier. It is a match. On the 5th of June, 2009, a detective from the Robbery Homicide Division named Daniel Jaramillo walks up to Stephanie Lazarus at her desk. He needs a favor, he tells her. There is a man downstairs in the jail facility who claims to know something about stolen art, and art theft is Lazarus's specialty. Could she come down and help him question the guy? It is a lie. There is no art thief. Lazarus, a detective who has spent her entire career running interrogations, is being walked into one as the suspect. Downstairs, in a small interview room, 2 detectives sit her down, and instead of asking about stolen paintings, they start asking about a name out of the distant past. Sherri Rasmussen, John Ruetten, a murder back in 1986. The conversation is careful at first, then it tightens, then it becomes unmistakable, and you can almost watch the ground shift under her feet. At one point, caught between a nervous laugh and dawning dread, Stephanie Lazarus looks at the 2 men across the table and asks them if she is on candid camera. She is not. For the first time in her life, she is on the wrong side of the table. And by the time that conversation is over, Stephanie Lazarus is placed under arrest, inside the very building where she had spent more than 20 years as one of its detectives, for the murder of the woman she had once promised no one else would have. The trial came in 2012, 26 years after Sherri died. By then, the evidence had piled up far beyond the bite mark. There were the confrontations, there was the threat, and there was the matter of the gun. Just under 2 weeks after Sherri was shot to death, Stephanie Lazarus, a police officer with ready access to firearms, walked in and reported that one of her own handguns, a revolver of the same type used to kill Sherri, had been stolen. It was a remarkably convenient time for that particular weapon to disappear, if that weapon had just been used to end a woman's life. And at the center of all of it sat that frozen swab, the piece of herself that Sherri had torn from her attacker with the last of her strength. The trial also forced the man at the center of it all back into the middle of it. John Ruetten took the witness stand, the husband who had lost his new wife to his own former girlfriend, made to sit in front of a courtroom and account for the tangled history that had ended in Sherri's death. Whatever he had told himself over the years, he now had to face it in public, with Sherri's family watching, and the woman who killed her sitting a few feet away. On the 8th of March 2012, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Stephanie Lazarus guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. The respected LAPD detective would spend the rest of her foreseeable life behind bars for a killing she had almost gotten away with. For Nels Rasmussen and his family, the verdict was not a surprise. It was something heavier than that. It was a confirmation of the thing they had been saying and being ignored about for a quarter of a century. They had named the killer in 1986. They had pointed detectives directly at Stephanie Lazarus, and they had been told they were watching too much television, that there was nothing there. For 23 years, they had to live with the knowledge that their daughter's murderer was not just free, but was herself a police officer, rising through the very institution that had waved the family away. And even the conviction did not fully end their fight. Decades after the trial, Stephanie Lazarus became eligible for parole, under a California law meant to give a second look to people who had committed their crimes at a young age. At one point, a parole board actually moved toward recommending her release before that decision was pulled back. And so the Rasmussen family found themselves doing once again the very thing they had been doing since 1986, showing up, speaking, refusing to let the woman who killed Sherri simply walk out. As it stands, Stephanie Lazarus remains behind bars, but the family that named her killer at the very beginning is still, all these years later, standing guard over their daughter's justice. Sherri Rasmussen was 29 years old, a nurse who ran a critical care unit, who saved other people's lives for a living, newly married, with everything in front of her. A woman who had told the people she loved that she was afraid of a specific person, by name, and who was murdered by exactly that person, in exactly the way she feared. She was never really a mystery. She had done everything right. She saw the danger, she named it out loud, and she asked for help. The only thing that failed her was the people whose job it was to listen. In the end, it was not the department that caught her killer. It was Sherri herself. In the last moments of her life, fighting a person far more powerful than the system would ever admit she was up against, she reached out and marked her attacker and left behind the one thing that could not be dismissed or ignored or told it had been watching too much television. She left the truth in a bite, frozen in time, waiting 23 years for someone to finally believe her.